Estamos de vuelta. Muchas gracias por continuar conectados. Vamos a seguir con el programa del Simposio de Arte en Espacios Públicos. Nuestra siguiente invitada nos acompaña desde Estados Unidos. Su nombre es Amanda Hunt y tendremos como intérprete a Caroline Minera. Para esta ponencia les pedimos que por favor las personas que quieran escuchar la traducción, si están en una computadora, puedan presionar el icono del mundo que van a encontrar en la parte inferior, en la parte de hasta abajo de la pantalla, van a encontrar un mundo y ahí pueden darle la opción en español. Si están desde un dispositivo móvil, también en la parte superior van a encontrar 3 puntos y ahí pueden darle clic en la opción de español. Perfecto, Amanda, estamos con usted. Bienvenida, bienvenida al Simposio de Arte en Espacios Públicos. La dejo en el uso de la palabra.
Good morning from Los Angeles, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me to the embassy and the municipality of Guatemala. It's an honor to be here sharing about my work. And give me just a moment to set up. I will be taking us through a tour of my practice today. Want to share with you all what public art means to me personally, what I think it means in terms of its value culturally, and where I think we should be focusing energy, resources, and artists in this kind of space for here on out. It's just a beautiful space to work in, and as a curator, it's my favorite. I think I can say that. So I am Director of Public Programs and Creative Practice currently at the yet to be opened Lucas Museum of Narrative Art here in Los Angeles. And come with me on a journey. I'm going to start us back in a place where I grew up. I want to kind of begin the story there. So I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this is important for a few reasons. I realized a few years ago giving a talk how deeply embedded and rooted my love for public works of art was. This is an image of City Hall in Philadelphia. It was designed by a Scottish-born architect in the Second Empire style. It took almost 15 years to build. It's beautiful. You can see kind of at the top a man peeking out. That's William Penn here in his full glory, one of the founding fathers. This is a bronze statue that was installed in 1894, and William Penn presides over the city. I think this for me probably was the first signal that there can be images writ large. And while this is a monument, this is political honoring, it's still an artwork in public space, it's sculpture. Also in Philadelphia, you know, thank you, Marella, your work is beautiful. Thinking a lot about muralism, wanting to just also draw on the history and rich tradition of muralism in Philadelphia. The Mural Arts program is one of the strongest in the country. This is an iconic work on a 4- or 5-story building downtown by Meg Seligman that I grew up with. And just to say that this lives on in a contemporary way. But to get us back to City Hall, this is an image of Klaus Oldenburg's clothespin, which sits exactly across the Civic Plaza from City Hall. It was built in it was created in 1976, which is, the country was founded in 1776 on the occasion of a bicentennial. This was presented. So this is a stainless steel work standing 45 feet tall. And it was commissioned by the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority as part of their 1% for Art program, which is a common feature in the States, that public art be connected to development or redevelopment projects where the corporation has to give 1% of its building funding to art and culture and to presenting something at a large scale for the public. So this is an image of it being enjoyed in the 80s. Just you can see life happening around it, people going to the bank, coming up from the subway, waiting for the bus. I really do remember this vividly as a child because of its scale. It's something that I still love experiencing in museums and in the world, just work that kind of overwhelms you, blows you away. Klaus Oldenburg is, as many of you know, I'm sure, a pop master. This is kind of more in his style of sculpture, pop art referencing Pepsi Cola here. This is muslin covered in paint. He's known for his food series. So this is kind of how the work exists in other spaces, but this is his contribution to the city of Philadelphia. Here is the clothing pen sitting across from City Hall, where I began our conversation today. So this work and William Penn kind of look at each other. This sculpture is said to be an elongated version of Brancusi's The Kiss, the embrace of two figures, which you can see a little bit better here in the foreground in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Gallery 188, which I grew up going to, and more closely here with the sculpture freestanding, probably in the collection. So taking that as the beginning of my story, my exposure and my love of art and public space, this is another Oldenburg work about 20 blocks away, called Split Button, made in 1981 on the University of Pennsylvania campus. And this, again, will all come together in a moment. This was another 1% for Art commission by the university. It's painted aluminum with enamel on an aluminum base. It's about 4 feet high and 16 feet in diameter. And the story is that Oldenburg joked that William Penn had lost a button. So this is his button split off of his coat and landed here. I remember experiencing that work like this as a child. I remember the sound of my zipper on the metal climbing this. My daycare was just around the corner. Some of you might recognize this style of architecture. This is Philadelphia-based Venturi Scott Brown and Associates intervention on a building in 1979. This is the Institute for Scientific Information, their corporate headquarters on Drexel University's campus, adjacent to Penn at 34th and Market, literally just 2 blocks down. And so these images remain in my mind. Again, as a little person experiencing big things in the world, look at these big, beautiful things. So this left quite an impression, and it's something that I carry forward today. I think to kind of pause here, what remains important to me in the value of public art and in the consideration of it is who will use it, who will experience it, who will encounter that work. It's a critical piece of developing public sculpture, public performance, you name it, with artists in public space. And I've loved working with those who've never done it before, because I believe and I know in my heart of hearts that they are capable of presenting something at a scale that they never have before, that they know the material to an extent that it would be almost seamless in a way. And I'm excited to show you those a few slides from now. But just really thinking through that, all of my work with artists as a curator is a collaboration. It's a dialogue that from start to finish is very important. The research that we do together, the context that we consider, the programming and the presentation that we develop. I leave the artwork to them completely with feedback, but this is some of the best parts of my job. Just really briefly, I know that there will be presentations on murals today and graffiti as well later. And I did also want to share from personal history. I wasn't alive in the 70s in New York, so I did not get to witness the train cars in the state. This was in the mid to late 70s. the states were going through an economic recession. The city could not keep up on the maintenance program for the subway. And so they were turned into moving mobile art. And these images, unfortunately, I only have a black and white one to share here, but the colors, just a moving sculpture through space, it's kinetic. I wish I could have ridden the train then. It might have been a little scarier, but it would have been art. You would have been in an installation on your commute to work every day. So I think just to say that all of these things sit in my brain and I think make their way into my work now. It's incredible what we hold in our memories and in our brains. So moving us up into a more contemporary moment, I just want to show you a few examples of places where I've worked that also value art in public space, art for the public, and how we worked in and with the public. That's something that I've brought with me to every position I've held, whether it's museums, galleries, or on special projects. This is an incredible photo mural by Njideka Akinyele Crosby that was made in 2018. Called Obodo, City, Country, Town, Ancestral Village. It was just a beautiful piece that faced Grand Avenue, which is a cultural kind of string of pearls in downtown Los Angeles. That was a wonderful piece I did not personally work on, but it was valued there. We have worked with many artists at a large scale, and this was a new program. Working backwards in time, I worked as associate curator at the Studio Museum of Art from 2014 until 16. And this is the building facade facing 125th Street in Harlem. It's a very busy thoroughfare. There are street vendors, there is noise, there is music, there is community every day. The famed studio residencies are just above that flag, so their windows face all of this life, and I think it gets absorbed in the work many times. This picture is of David Hammond's flag, which hangs there every day as part of the fabric of the institution. It's the African-American flag that he made in 1992 that is part of the collection and part of public space in Harlem. This is the building facade of LAX Art, a nonprofit organization where I began my work in Los Angeles in 2011. This is a mural by Carl Handel. And again, you're just getting the sense of spaces that I've gravitated towards from a very kind of early moment in my career. That first scribble on the building was not something I worked on, but was part of the job and the day-to-day when I began my time there. This is a project that I produced and conceived of with artist Carter Mull, another contemporary artist based in downtown Los Angeles. This is a view of his double clock with Alana Pearl on 11th Street in the Fabric District. And this represents so much of what I love about working in public space. You have to connect to people living their daily lives. Hopefully that's the goal. Maybe they don't love it. Maybe they do. Maybe there's a conversation about it, but people have been impacted in some way. That's really the goal. But it also has to sit and situate itself in a way that makes sense. So this is brilliant because the model Alana is wearing fashions that were taken from this area of wholesale stores that were really a part of her visual presentation and became folded into the work. And this kind of double presentation, it was just empty ad space. And part of the joy and adventure of working in public spaces is you get to connect with people you might not otherwise. So I had to call the building owner, ask about the space, try to explain what we were doing. I don't think they exactly understood all of the places we were coming from, but they gave it to us for free. And this remained there for a few years. So I just love that it becomes a part of the day-to-day. I'm going to shift gears to take us to Oregon State. I curated the Portland Biennial in 2014. I visited over 65 studios while I was living in Los Angeles. I was commuting to Portland, Oregon, and ended up with a project with 15 artists. Some of them were collaborations, and you'll see those here. And part of the work was public art and putting billboards up in public space. So you'll see Carter's in the Fabric District, and now I'm trying out the billboard as something in different kinds of city spaces and civic uses. This is Ralph Pugai's Baby Coughing, kind of absurd, maybe a little grotesque, definitely very funny piece, painting that was translated to a billboard. And this was really Ralph's commentary on the gentrification of his city and of a neighborhood that was historically immigrant and, you know, began flipping. So this is also an interesting kind of thread of a story around making art in public space. You know, is it part of the 1%? Is it part of the development plan? Is it critiquing what's happening around it? In this case, it was. Another artist who I worked with to really play with this idea of landscape, situating a landscape within a landscape, was Richard Thompson, an incredible artist who passed just this last year during COVID, who lived on his family's farm, 3 generations owned, in a beautiful part of the state. And I brought a little bit of the country to the city. You have to think about infrastructure too in these places. At LAX Art, we were on a very busy boulevard. You know, Los Angeles is known for cars, but I realized functioning and moving through the city in Portland, they don't just ride bikes there. Not everyone is walking. There needed to also be something visual to experience as part of this biennial there. And then finally, the last piece that was in public was a collaboration between 2 artists, or 1 artist and 1 writer, Christopher Micklig, a professor at the University of Oregon in Eugene, and writer John Zerzan.
Escritor John Zerzan, que...
Oh, sorry, I could hear something. John Zerzan, who is an anarchist and philosopher, and this project was called Kiosk, Kiosk, Kiosk. There were 3 cited in 3 different public plaza locations throughout the city, and each had quotes from language and theory, critiquing domestic farming and agriculture, symbolic thought, addressing the concept of time. The idea was that it was like an information board that you used to be able to tack, you know, call for a babysitter, lost dog, that these kiosks would be a site to give and receive information. So the information here was in the form of quotations reflecting on humanity. It turned out the day after we installed the last one, someone from the city called and said, Amanda, we have some news. Someone smashed the panel at this park, which was at the site of a new high-rise development tower, a home for recovering addicts, and an unhoused population around it, alongside people enjoying the park for recreation. And for me, what was very interesting was who reacted to the work in that way. I think they were very surprised that I wasn't upset about it. Art is replaceable, human life is not. I draw a line somewhere, certainly, but this for me meant that there was a response to the work, and that I'm very open to that. I think that is part of the process and the richness of this. It will come up later in the presentation in a different way, and I'll address that, but sometimes those moments are meaningful as well. Going back to Harlem, New York, as part of my work at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which was founded 50 years ago to support the work of artists of the African diaspora, originally founded because there was no space for Black artists or artists of color to properly exhibit and honor their work and the work of the creative community there until that point. 50 years later, the landscape has changed. I think the art world has diversified, and I hope it continues to, but that was the mission of this museum and remains today. And when I first joined the museum in 2014, I learned that they were embarking on a new building project, a capital campaign. And one of my first meetings as a curator was, what would you do if we had no building? Of course, I was very excited. What I proposed and ended up realizing later, a year later, was 4 commissioned public sculptures by 4 different artists in the 4 historic parks located in Harlem. So this is just a Google map in which I've located them. At the very north, Jackie Robinson Park in Upper Manhattan, the skinny St. Nicholas Park just south of that, further south bordering Columbia University's Morningside Park, and then to the right, Marcus Garvey Park, named after the great political figure, just a block from the museum site. So I'll walk us through a few of those pieces. But when I speak about trusting an artist and their use of material, 3 out of the 4 artists who I invited to do this had never done work in public space before, but man, did they knock it out of the park. This is Kevin Beasley's Who's Afraid to Listen to Red, Black, and Green. 3 different discs cited in the same lawn in the park, Morningside Park, bordering Columbia University. So you can see, of course, students enjoying the sunshine there, sharing space with it. So these were all kind of in dialogue with one another, and they were acoustic mirrors. So as you got closer, you could hear yourself reflected. Kevin's practice often dips clothing that in this instance was taken from a secondhand store in Harlem, where he had gone for years and actually had deep connections to his family, dipped in resin, and then kind of presented as these satellites standing 8 foot tall. They were awesome. It was beautiful to see them living in the park space. And I should say I worked with the New York City Parks Department to realize these. It was a very big contract and deal to kind of negotiate that between the institution as the studio museum curator, with permission and participation of the city park system, as well as the individual stakeholders and community members who were stewards of each historic park. They were like different characters in a play. So this here is Rudy Shepard's Black Rock Negative Energy Absorber at Jackie Robinson Park, which was a block from where I lived at the time on 150th Street. And the idea was you could fit into that nook. Your body would be able to kind of be protected. And the idea of the negative energy absorber was really to create a safe space in public space if you needed healing. There was a performance that was activated by the artist during its run for a year that it was up. And it proved to be very timely. 2016 and beyond has been a very intense time in the States. And I think Rudy knew the salve that was needed early on. This is Simone Lee's a particularly elaborate Imba Yucca Bakira, or kitchen house, stands locked up while its owners live in diaspora. This work was sited on the Great Lawn in Marcus Park, a beautiful offering, again, a block from the museum. Simone has roots in Jamaica, as did Garvey, and was, again, for the first time, really translating her incredible sculptures to something at this scale. And it's just, I can't pick a favorite child, but of course this is up there. We had an incredible time making these thatch roofs that ended up, we ended up sourcing labor that was very local. 2 men from Sierra Leone, I believe, were walking by one day and said, "We know how to do this. I'm not sure you do." And they ended up creating the roofs with Simone. It was just beautiful to watch it unfold. Here's another view of them in the park space. So this work was arranged in a cluster to suggest community. All were without entrances. You would think many children were very frustrated that you could not enter it. And the reflection was really that it was a celebration of diaspora, but it also spoke to the displacement. Where is home? Where does home go when you leave home? how can you access it? So these were very generative in terms of public conversation and private as well. And the final and fourth piece was by artist Corey Newkirk, who's based in Los Angeles. This is called Centra. This is St. Nicholas Park by the City College, just above the A and C subway entrance. You can see kind of at the bottom of the stairs. If you've worked in a restaurant or been behind the scenes in the large refrigerators, there are those plastic strip flaps between the freezer and the refrigerator as chefs and the prep staff run in and out. And that's what he used for this. He just used everyday material, as he always does, in truly poetic and incredible ways. So this is a view of an image the New York Times took of it living in the world, a summertime tour of public art. And the great joy of seeing this one live was that the stairway was cleaned up. The city focused their attention here in a way that they had not in a long time. And when Corey and I were looking at the work as it was installed, a woman walked by, did not look at us, did not look at the art, but said loud enough for us to hear, "It's about time." And that for me was the greatest success and affirmation that this work was important, that I could pursue incredible things with incredible artists that meant different things to people, but that it brought art to a space that was accessible and available to the people who use those spaces every day. I'm switching gears now to Palm Springs, California. In 2019, I was co-curator with my husband, Matthew Shum, under the directorship of Neville Wakefield for the second edition of a biennial, a public art biennial that is in the Coachella Valley, which this is a map of. And some of you might recognize Doug Aitken's Mirage House. This was a mirror-covered, classic ranch-style modernist home that is iconic of that area. So he's reflecting the landscape back with this house. This is a very popular work from the first edition in 2017. When we were first brought into this biennial, I was reflecting a lot on earthworks that I was familiar with in art history. This is Michael Heiser's Double Negative in Nevada, where he had cut hundreds of feet into the earth in a really substantial way. Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty of 1970, sited in Utah as part of the Great Lake, where he moved earth to create the spiral, which lives differently throughout the year and throughout different droughts or seasons. But realized also that these were all men working in the landscape, shifting the earth, changing it. And I wanted to think about that as a woman, certainly as a curator, and as just a person considering which kind of artists I would be working with and how we would be working with the land. So a different kind of public space, but public nonetheless, all available and accessible to the public, just maybe a few miles off the grid. And then finally, another reference, Nancy Holt, Robert Smithson's partner, Sun Tunnels, also in Utah, a few miles away, in which they map constellations from the sky into these concrete tunnels that are meditative spaces. This is taken at sunset by someone else. But again, just thinking about how you intervene and play with earth in some of these public works. So back to Palm Springs, this is just kind of a visual. We did over 50 miles of space of geography. We had people meet in Palm Springs at the top left and go all the way down to the Salton Sea in a way that had not been done for this biennial before. That was my partner Matthew's idea. And a lot of the works and projects that he and I did with certain artists were around this consideration of Indigenous land. We all live on Indigenous land. And in Palm Springs, it was a very complicated and interesting story. You see, this looks like a checkerboard. This is the map of land ownership You know, the green spaces are tribe owned. This is the Caliente Band of Indians website in which they map it out. So some of the houses, you know, which are $3 or $5 or $10 million, are sitting on land that is not their own, that they are leasing from the tribe. So we wanted to think about that very explicitly and carefully, again, as we were coming into communities in the Coachella Valley, either at the Salton Sea or just throughout this valley. So the first artist project that you would encounter from a certain path off of the freeway coming into Palm Springs was artist Cara Romero, who is from the Chemehuevi tribe. And this is called Jackrabbit, Cottontail, and Spirits of the Desert. It was responsive to the ancestral lands of the Cahuilla, Chemehuevi, Serrano, and Mojave people. You can see that beautiful land in the background of these 4 billboard images. Again, I wanted to bring billboards out into public space for this project. She did an incredible job. These are all new works, new images commissioned and made back on the land where she grew up. These are 4 special time traveling visitors in her conception. And they've come to visit the ancestral lands of their sister tribes in the Coachella Valley in 2019. This idea that indigeneity is not a thing of the past. It's very contemporary as well. Was a really powerful way to root down and think about the land for this. In another part of Palm Springs, actually in Desert Hot Springs, this is the Going Nowhere Pavilion, an image taken by drone. Artist Julian Hober made a Mobius strip from concrete breeze block, which is a visual kind of vernacular, very recognizable in the desert landscape. It cools things, it gives a kind of aesthetic punch to some of these modernist homes, and you see it framing the houses in many, many places there. So he made his own, and the idea is that the joining ends of a rectangular strip, which is what form, it's a continuous line, the Mobius strip, has a direct relationship to methods of psychology. So Lacan, his own attempts to use topology to map the mind, and the study of geometric properties as a vehicle to kind of describe and represent the human mind, is something that this artist had been working through for years and was extremely excited to make at a large scale. You could enter the work on either side and kind of have to follow the path and then reflect in the brain, if you will. And then directly a few yards away in an abandoned house, he made one of his incredible paintings. This is executed variant DHS #1, another kind of abstract geometric painting to represent a map of psychology, his own, your own, but you could enter the pool, you could enter the site and kind of, again, sit and reflect in this space. And all kinds of people use these spaces. This was situated in a community, a small modernist community in Desert Hot Springs. So there were some local visitors, and of course, many people from places far away came to see it as well. And it was just wonderful to see all of these things activated. And then Eric Mack, this was a gorgeous piece sited at the Salton Sea across from another work by Colombian artist Iván Argota, who my partner worked with. I don't have an image here, but Eric is based in New York and uses fabric beautifully. We met while I was at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and I was very excited to make public work with him. I really wanted him to push his scale further. So we used, through connections in the community that we developed quickly, found access to this abandoned gas station, which is of course very, very Southern California imagery, thinking about Ed Ruscha and the burning gas station print, car culture. So he dressed this one up. This is called Halter. And it just graced the building and the architecture beautifully. This is all Missoni fabric from the fashion house in Italy. They donated through another incredible connection with a beautiful project manager of ours, the fabric from their archive, because Eric had always wanted to use them. Fashion is a part of the language of his work. It's part of the expression, and they really met us there. So this is another incredible drone view of Halter, the gas station at kind of the corner of these two roads as it looks on the Salton Sea, which is a man-made lake, actually industrially made, but that's a story for another time. The final project of Desert X was Kathleen Ryan's Ghost Palm, another work in Desert Hot Springs. And this was incredible. Katie, and I call her Katie, not Kathleen, because she's another dear friend, literally recreated the scale of the Washingtonian palm tree, which is native to this part of California. It's the iconic palm tree that you see everywhere. And she recreated it with acrylic beading, with plastic stripping. What you don't get the sense of is the movement. Up to 60-mile-per-hour winds come to this valley, and these were blowing in the breeze. You could access this from a resort site, and it was off the beaten path. You had to seek it out. We actually opened the biennial here at this site with native song and blessing, and it was incredibly powerful. And the research that we did together, studying palm trees, and you have to understand that they kind of exist in the desert in these oases. This is where the tectonic plates of the earth meet, where the water pools and where an oasis emerges, and the palm trees exist as part of that topography. So she studied all of that and wanted to create her own kind of mirage. It's an incredible work. I hope you all will look at it maybe after this presentation, but this was a spectacular kind of cap to the experience in the desert, really thinking about, again, the people who have lived there over time, over centuries, the people who live there now, how they engage with the landscape on the day-to-day in their own backyard, and maybe how you can see something perhaps you've taken for granted anew, or something you've always loved reflected and elevated, like the palm tree here. So back to Los Angeles, California. I've taken us all through what I hope has been an interesting look at my practice, look at how I think about art in public space, how people use it, how we create it, what it means, and bringing us to my current job. This is the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, a rendering for the building by architect Ma Yan-song, who, it's incredible. The museum sits in Exposition Park, which is very close to downtown Los Angeles for anyone who's been. It sits across from the University of Southern California campus, football stadium, newly built, and also it is part of South Los Angeles, which is historically Black and brown. There's an incredible population of Latinx folks living here. 46% of Los Angeles County is Latinx, and you will find a lot of that population in South Los Angeles. And what's important to kind of look at, you know, as we take in this futuristic canopy created by this, I don't know, otherworldly spaceship, I'll show you a picture of it in process now, is thinking about where we are and citing that intentionally, but also being in dialogue with the communities around it. What's interesting about the site is that it was a parking lot for the university before. The entire campus sits on 11 acres of what will be park and gardens, and I'll show you that in a moment. But before this, it was agricultural land. After it was agricultural, property, it was a racetrack. Even long before both of those things, it was ancestral land occupied by Tongva tribes and others of this region. So we'll be thinking about all of those things. As the director of public programming, you can expect I'm thinking a lot about the public and how we are engaging them around issues of sight. where we are situated in the city, how we are engaged with the community and their stories, and how those stories are reflected in what we're doing. Stay tuned to see what we're presenting in terms of public art. This is a beautiful rendering and view of the plaza, which is between the two lobby entrances. You see on the left and right, the oculus at the center that lets the light shine through in beautiful ways. I'm thinking a lot about the plaza as a space of activation, of dialogue, of protest, of gathering, as public space, really. And that's a lot of what we're talking about as a museum here. And the idea that narrative art is something that we all know and that we will be articulating in this museum. We all have our own narratives. Narrative art is just the visual representation of those stories. And that will be expressed in film, in painting, in comic books, in children's stories, in poster art. It's an incredible collection that I'm so excited to activate and animate and bring to the public in different ways. This is the Parks and Gardens I referenced, a rendering, again, of 11 acres surrounding this 100,000 square foot giant building that will be accessible during daytime hours. And this is just to give a sense of public space being used. I think we can all agree that the gravel would be a great site for a public work. So we're sorting these things out. Stay tuned. We open the museum in 2023. Our website is active if you're curious to learn more about it. But I'll kind of end here and leave you with the imagination going wild and the possibilities. This is an aerial view of the building being built. This was when the final beam was being placed earlier this year in March, as it sits again next to the Coliseum at USC, the university, the LAFC Stadium beyond, the 110 highway beyond that. This is a view from Vermont, I believe, and South Los Angeles. And so you see all of the places that it is occupying and sited among. So just very, very excited to gather more of the culture, of the story, of the histories there, to think about this as a place where we welcome as many people and as many kinds of people as we can and work to create art in the public space together. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Amanda, por compartirnos todo este conocimiento, las obras, acerca de todo este arte tan importante. Pues tenemos acá en el chat una pregunta. La pregunta dice lo siguiente. ¿Esta serie de intervenciones formó parte de algún circuito o proyecto en conexión urbana?
Carolyn, are you there?
Repito la pregunta. ¿Esta serie de intervenciones formó parte de algún circuito o proyecto en conexión urbana?
I'm sorry, I messed something up. One more time. Yes, yes. Yes, the Lucas Museum is co-founded by George Lucas, the filmmaker, and his wife and partner, Melody Hobson, who's an incredible businesswoman. George is a University of Southern California alum. This area is part of an opportunity zone in Los Angeles, but it was chosen after a long journey in different cities. It landed in Los Angeles, which makes sense for many, many reasons, personal but also institutional. So this is a privately funded museum. This is really what he wanted to give to the world in terms of sharing his collection and his love of story.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Invitamos a los participantes si tienen alguna otra pregunta que por favor nos la puedan colocar en el chat para que Amanda pueda comentarnos un poco al respecto. Ahora nos consultan. ¿La selección de las obras, cómo fue realizada?
In all of the projects, thank you for that question. I begin with the artist. All of the works that I showed you, from the billboards to the sculptures to the architectural inventions, were all new works. They were all new ideas. They were all built for the project or the exhibition. So the conversation for me really begins with the artist and trusting that artist and being excited about being in dialogue and in collaboration with that artist. So if not knowing and trusting them as a person, trusting their ability with material. So that's where it begins every time. And as I said, just the consideration of the context and the stories we want to be capturing and telling through their work, their use of material, their ideas, but also the place in which we are working. Before I take the next question, I just want to say thank you to everyone behind the scenes, behind the screen, making this all possible, from Basilia, Jessica to Carolyn. Thank you for everything.
Ok, la siguiente pregunta quizás sí va un poco en torno a lo que hablábamos anteriormente. Nos consultan que si fue a través de un comité curatorial. No.
It depends on which project you're asking about. These are all different projects or exhibitions, but no, these were not curatorial committees. I, as the curator, am able to make a presentation, pitch an idea, and really advocate for the artist and the project. So it begins there, where I say, I've been wanting to work with Eric Mack and Kathleen Ryan and so for years. They would be perfect for this. Here's what I'm envisioning. Can we start the conversation? Sometimes that's in dialogue with your collaborators and partners, as it was with Matthew and Neville for Desert X. For the Portland Biennial, that was entirely my own. In terms of a committee, if you present to a committee, it's usually a city committee, a community council. So in Harlem, it was a different committee or council or friends of the park that I had to share the ideas with, in addition to the city of New York and their public art division. So the committees that usually you are presenting in front of and trying to make a case for are the people who protect and maintain the land and the public space that you will hopefully be working on.
Muy bien, tenemos una pregunta más. Bueno, tenemos un par más. La siguiente es, ¿cómo es la reacción de las personas con el arte público en áreas marginales en Los Ángeles, si lo hubiera?
I'm so sorry. Carolyn, you cut out.
Voy de nuevo. ¿Cómo es la
That's a great
reacción?
question.
Okay.
Sorry, my internet connection is unstable. So in terms of marginal areas, I really appreciate that question. Sometimes that's who considers it marginal. But I'm going to bring us back to Desert X, the decision to want to work in the Salton Sea and to extend the experience there. You have to understand that people are traveling for this experience. They want to engage in this Easter egg hunt and find the prize, which is the artwork. And part of what we committed to was extending that to other cultural areas in the Coachella Valley. Places like the Salton Sea, which is industrial, it's labor heavy, it's populated by people doing that labor, Black and brown communities around Palm Springs area, in service industries, and we wanted to bring what we were doing there as well. And we had a really interesting presentation, Matthew, the co-curator, and myself at one of the community meetings. You know, we were there with the fire department, the police department, people suffering of respiratory conditions because of the Salton Sea, which is a toxic waste site from industrial runoff. Even though it looks beautiful, it's a very strange place. So those marginal spaces are extremely important. Part of how I see my role as someone who has my identity, who has my privilege and my access to art and culture and artists, is to share it with as many people as possible. So if we can't necessarily bring it to you, as I was able to in a lot of these, the woman who said it's about time, maybe that the stair was cleaned up so that she could access it safely and experience the art, like that's critical.
Muchas gracias, Amanda. Tenemos varias preguntas más. La siguiente es, ¿los proyectos en áreas desérticas cómo son visitados?
So that was only for 3 months in 2019, but the program by which people visited those artworks, where they were given a map, physical and digital on the phone, you could sign up for tours with volunteers with the organization of Desert X, or you could drive on your own. You could take the 2-hour drive from Los Angeles and take a day trip. They'd be exhausted and maybe sunburnt at the end of the day. You could fly into the airport and experience it that way. We documented it so that people all around the world could access images, but it was really, you know, how you did it. Some places were harder to get to. There wasn't public transportation in a traditional way. So that's where the organization really offered free tours and kind of stepped up in that way. And that was important to us as well.
La siguiente pregunta que nos hacen es, ¿ha habido alguna obra que no haya sido bien recibida por el público?
So I talked about the one in Portland that got smashed. I think that made someone angry. I think that upset them. I think they reacted to that in some way. Eric Mack's beautiful work, Halter, actually was destroyed. Someone violently destroyed it. It was burnt in an act of vandalism. And that was a very difficult moment for the artist and myself. That work was not protected. It's hard to afford 24-hour security in these sites, and you have to trust the community and the relationships there that the work will be cared for. So I don't know if that upset someone. I don't know the rationale behind it, but that was an example of the public reacting in a way that was extremely difficult. Engaging, of giving feedback, and we try to meet that in different conversations, either public like this in a forum or on an individual level in conversations, but sometimes you cannot control the outcomes. And while I'm open to many, that was I have to say and share with everyone, a hazard of working in the public. And that was a very difficult experience.
Así es. También nos consultan si usted trabaja con la comunidad para intervenir artísticamente en el espacio particular.
Definitely. Thank you for that great question. My internet is being unstable again. I hope you can hear me. Yes, for things that I'm working on in the future or that I've done in the past, you know, I've mentioned performances, I've mentioned programming. A lot of those things, I like to bring in other community members and be in dialogue. Attending community meetings in advance of presentation of artwork is also important so that people are a part of it. You're not just plopping something down rudely without introduction and assuming that it's going to work for everyone. You can't please everyone all the time, but the engagement and the dialogue is a really important piece of it at the community level. So if it's not an artist project with someone from that community, is it a conversation with them? Is it a workshop? Is it a visit to an organization or a facility or a class that is affected by the artwork that's been kind of placed in their community? So really thinking about it 360 in that way.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿quién se encarga de la conservación de las piezas a largo plazo?
Great question. Always a tough one. I'll be very transparent. It's difficult to get a partner or a host or a steward of a property or land to take care of something for longer than a year. Usually you'll see a kind of timeline if you all do research after this on some of these projects. They were up for a year, and sometimes they're up for even less time, like 3 months, which is always painful. It's an enormous effort. It's a lot of material and labor, and then it can only be enjoyed for 3 months. So it really depends on where you're hoping to work. As you saw in Palm Springs, we were negotiating and in conversation with the local tribes, with the city of Palm Springs, with the county of Riverside as well. So it's many different people, you know, representing and stewarding and conserving the land. So sometimes that did not work out. If we chose a site for Katie originally and we just couldn't get someone to buy into protecting the work or working on the land in that way, that's a huge part of the consideration of working in public space. So thank you for that. Any artists or curators here, just keep in mind that's part of the negotiation and conversation and adventure of finding the site.
Muy bien, Amanda, y vamos con una última pregunta porque ya vamos un poco sobre el tiempo, pero queremos también que nos compartan cómo puede el artista, el curador y las autoridades que promueven el arte en espacios públicos proteger las obras para que no sean agredidas por personas vandálicas.
I love that. Yeah, I think in the age of digital media, use social media. This just kind of occurred to me right now because of that question. Thank you for that. I think because you are working in a space that is shared by many people, draw on that community and those relationships to help you protect that work. I think that's part of what's so important about engaging people wherever you are early on, as early as possible. And COVID has made that hard at the museum for me as someone working in public space and with people all the time. I love it, but we haven't been able to get past the screen. I can't really hit the pavement in the same way. So I think being able to call on your relationships that you've developed, the trust that you've developed and built and worked intentionally to do so, that builds trust and that builds care. And that means of people, and it goes both ways, and it can mean the work as well. And that's all a critical part of this. I don't work in a vacuum. When you work in public space, your sharing space. So be generous in that. And I think it can go both ways and benefit the experience and the life of the work. Thank you for that question. It's perfect.
Perfecto, Amanda. A usted muchas gracias. Creemos también que fue una pregunta perfecta para terminar. Gracias por acompañarnos, por estar aquí con nosotros desde la distancia, por compartir todos los conocimientos y toda esta información que es tan importante para nosotros. Muchas gracias también a Carolyn Minera, que estuvo traduciendo. A ambas les agradecemos por ser parte del Simposio de Arte del Espacio Público.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you so much.